process. We're going to highlight opportunities for your input. We're going to summarize the district's budgeting principles, equity investments, and projected financial challenges. And we're going to discuss the plan for how to address those financial challenges. And then finally, we're going to get your feedback on opportunities to improve our budgeting and the plan to address the fiscal challenges. Here are 3 questions that we're going to ask at the end of today's presentation. We're going to get your feedback on them, but I want to share them with you now so you have them in mind as we go through the presentation. First is, how can we make the district and school budget process more accessible and meaningful to you? 2, equity, student-centered decision-making, and valuing the workforce are board guiding principles. What do these principles mean to you? What resources and programs do you value at your school? And then number 3, what are your thoughts on the district's plan to address the deficit? So in the presentation, we're going to provide you with a lot of information that'll help you answer these questions at the end of our session today. So first, a little bit on the district's budget process, and this is very similar to all districts in the state of California, if not in the country. But LAUSD, like other districts, receive funding primarily from the state and then also from the federal government. And a big factor that determines the amount of funding that we receive is our student enrollment, the number of students that we serve. And as you might already be aware, LAUSD's enrollment has been declining for over 2 decades. And what I mean by declining is each year we have fewer students than the last. And again, because so much, the vast majority of our funding is based on the number of students we serve, the fact that we have fewer students has a very significant impact on our funding levels. So like our own budgets, our own household finances, we receive revenue. In our case, in our personal lives, it might be in the form of wages or income. And then we also have expenses. So in our personal lives, we have our rent and our utilities and our food expenses. School districts also have expenses, and those are on things like teachers and counselors and custodians and our facilities. And just like in our home finances and our personal finances, whenever we have more income than expenses, where we have more money that we earn than what we spend, that money stays in our bank account, in either our checking or our savings account. And the school district is very similar. When there are years where we have more income or revenue than we spend or have in expenditures, that extra money stays in our bank account, in our what we call often our reserves or our ending balances. On the slide here, you'll see a link for the budget transparency tool. This is a tool that you may already be familiar with. And in this tool, you'll be able to find information about school budgets. Okay, so it provides a lot of information about school budgets, and you can search for different schools and kind of dig into the details of that school's budget. Next, we want to highlight some opportunities to receive input from the community. On the left-hand side, there are several school site meetings that happen at the schools where the budget is often discussed. First, you have the school site budget development meetings that are happening now in the months of December and January. You also have school site council meetings that happen throughout the year. There are also coffees with the principal that also happen throughout the year, but around this time of year, principals often will discuss the school budgets at those coffees with the principals that happen in December and January. In the middle, you'll see some opportunities to provide input and to participate in the budget process at the regional level. There are the Local Control Accountability Plan, or LCAP, engagement sessions, and there's a link for some of those upcoming meetings. Now, on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see some opportunities to participate At the district level or at the board level, there are committees of the whole meetings, one that already happened in November, another that's happening in December, where the budget will be discussed, as well as the plan to address the district's deficit. There is also always fiscal status meetings or first interim and second interim reports that are produced in December and March, and that's always in December and March. And this is required for every school district in the state. And as part of those fiscal status reports, the district provides updates on the current school year's finances, but also projects the finances out for 2 additional school years. Then in every June, there are 2 budget meetings. There's the budget and LCAP hearing, and then another board meeting where the budget and LCAP are voted on and approved by the board. And those happen in June of every year. And at the link there on the right-hand side, you'll see some information on those upcoming board meetings and committee meetings. Okay, so this is some information about this year's budget. First, you'll see at the top some of the guiding principles that inform not just decisions about the budget, the district's budget and school budgets, but also inform every decision that gets made, or should inform every decision that gets made throughout the school year. So one of the first guiding principle is equity, and I think folks are probably familiar with that concept, but what it means is where we provide resources and supports based on the needs of our students and schools. So it's not that every student gets the same exact level of resources and supports, but instead we take into account the needs of our students and schools. Another guiding principle is student-centered decision-making, which is what it sounds like. It means that the decisions that get made around the budget and other things should be putting students at the center of those decisions. So understanding what the impact of decisions, what the impact on our students is very important. And then third, it's valuing the workforce. And so this also is what it sounds like. Every service that we provide to our students is done by our valuable workforce, be it our teachers, our counselors, our administrators, our custodians, our cafeteria workers, our central office support teams. Everything is done by our valued workforce, and so that's an important guiding principle as well. On the bottom of the slide, you'll see some highlights in the district's budget for the current school year. These are just major highlights. This is not everything that's included in this year's budget, but there are some of the major highlights. So first, you'll see that the Student Equity Needs Index, or SENI, was maintained at $700 million. SENI, as you might already know, is the supplemental allocation that's provided to schools based on student characteristics. And so schools that have been identified as having higher needs based on the student characteristics receive a higher level of funding. And so that's SENI. Also, there were LGBTQ plus supports and programs for $2 million, arts in schools for $238 million, transitional kindergarten, which is our program for 4-year-olds. That's now a statewide program where all students that are 4 years old can now attend transitional kindergarten, or TK. And the teachers and aides for that program are $186 million. And workforce protection program, $60 million. The Black Student Achievement Plan, or BSAP, $125 million is the ongoing allocation. And there was an additional $50 million allocated on top of that in the current school year. And then finally, student centers for $5 million. So these are just some of the major highlights, as I mentioned, in this year's budget, but there's so much more that the district's funding goes to support for the benefit of our students. Okay, so for the next couple slides, I'm going to talk about the financial challenge that the district is facing. When the district adopted or approved its budget for the current school year back in June, the district projected a $1.6 billion deficit by the end of the 27-28 school year. And so just as I mentioned a moment ago, there are certain times of the year where the district is providing not only updates on the current school year or the upcoming school year, but a projection for 2 additional school years. And so when the June budget is approved by the board, it includes not only the budget for the upcoming school year, but also projections for 2 additional school years. And as part of those projections that are required by the state, the district was projecting a $1.6 billion deficit by the end of the 27-28 school year, or the 3rd year in that required projection. The main reasons why the main factors that are contributing to that projected deficit, first is what I mentioned earlier. We've had declining enrollment for over 2 decades, where we have fewer students each year. And this is a trend that is not unique to LAUSD. It is both a statewide and national trend where large urban districts are seeing fewer and fewer students each year. And as I mentioned earlier, this has a very substantial impact on our revenue, on the amount of funding that we receive. Another major contributing factor is that we have ongoing costs for activities and programs that were established during the pandemic and that were initially funded using about $6 billion of one-time COVID relief funds. Those were primarily provided from the federal government. And we put in place many important programs to address the impact of the pandemic on our students and their learning, and also to safely reopen our schools. And while that money, that $6 billion, has been fully spent and is expired, is no longer available, many of the programs that were established with those funds continue. And so that also has a huge impact on our budget and our projected finances. It's important to note that this projected deficit does not include the cost of any potential increases in employee compensation. Also, we're continuing to monitor federal funding uncertainties. Any additional federal funding cuts would worsen the deficit that we're already facing. Okay, so on the next graph, there are a couple trends, and I'm going to go through it a little bit slowly just to make sure that I explain what we're looking at together. So first is the green line that's going down from left to right. That is our enrollment, our kinder through 12th grade enrollment from the 15-16 school year all the way to the current school year. And you'll see that it's declined very substantially over just the about last 10 years. It's gone down by over 130,000 students just in the last 10 years. And so again, that has a very, very substantial impact on our funding levels. The next trend I want to highlight are the blue and orange bars. So what we're looking at is for each group of blue and orange bars are 1 school year. So starting on the far left, the 15-16 school year going all the way to the right to the current 25-26 school year. And what you're looking at is general fund revenues in blue, total general fund that includes unrestricted and restricted general fund. In blue is the revenues, the amount of money we brought into the general fund. And orange is general fund expenditures, or how much we spent in those years. And so for every year, except for the current year, these are the actual revenues and expenditures that actually happened for each of those school years. The current school year, of course, is not over yet. We are a few months into the current school year, and so these are the amounts that have been budgeted or projected for the current school year. And so any year where the blue bar, the revenue, is higher than the orange bar, the expenditures, that means we brought in more revenue than we spent. And so we had a surplus, or we had excess revenues. And as I mentioned earlier, kind of like in our household budgets, that money doesn't just go away. That money, unless it's part of an expiring grant, that money can be spent in future years. Okay, so that money goes into our bank account, what we call our reserves or ending balances, and they're available for use in the future. And so you'll see for many years we had the blue bar that was higher than the orange bar. And that was especially true during the pandemic year. So in the 2021 school year, the 21-22 school year, the 22-23 school year, you'll see the blue bar was much higher than the orange bar. The revenues or the income was much higher than what we spent. And you're probably guess that the main reason for that is we got a very substantial amount of revenue from the federal government during those years, which allowed for us to build up our savings account, our bank account, our reserve. In those years, we also had really high levels of state funding from California. We were receiving really high levels of funding compared to the past, and that also contributed to these large surpluses, okay, where we had the revenues far exceeding our expenditures. So what you'll notice looking at this 24-25 school year, so last school year, the second to last group of blue and orange bars, that for the first time in a long time, that orange bar, what we spent, was much higher than the blue bar, what we brought in revenue or income. And so that is a year that's already happened. That is not a projection. We spent almost $2 billion more in the total general fund than we brought in last school year. Okay. And the only reason that was possible is because we had built up our savings account over the previous years. And so a school district can only spend more in one school year than they bring in if they have reserves, if they have ending balances, if they have a bank account that can be used to pay for that difference, for that spending beyond what we brought in revenue. And so the challenge that we're facing is that what happened last school year, where we spent almost $2 billion more than we brought in the general fund, that pattern is projected to continue in the future. And so in the current school year, the 25-26 school year, we expect to spend over $2 billion more than we bring in the current school year. And if the district does not take action, then that trend is projected to continue. And what's going to happen if that trend continues without action by the district is that eventually those reserves, those bank account balances, those savings will be fully spent and will eventually go negative. And so that's what you see on the next slide here. This is our unrestricted general fund ending balances. These are the ending balances, the reserves, the bank account that can be used for any educational purpose. And so what you can see is that we expect to end the current school year with about $1.45 billion of truly unrestricted reserves. We expect to end next school year, the 26-27 school year, with just barely more than zero, about $15 million. And then we expect to end the 27-28 school year with a negative ending unrestricted balance of about $1.6 billion. And that's that $1.6 billion that I mentioned a couple slides before. That is the financial challenge that the district is facing. And again, this is if the district takes no action. And again, it does not reflect, it does not include any future changes in compensation or benefit costs beyond what's already known, or any potential reductions in federal funding or any changes in state funding levels. And so the reason why the state requires that we do this projection into the future, where we not only provide updates about the current year or next school year, but additional school years, is because the state and the county and districts need to be able to see what will happen to the finances of a district at the current program levels, at current resource levels, and to see if there's something that might need to be done. And so what we see here is that we are projecting the district to have basically an overdrawn bank account in the unrestricted general fund of $1.6 billion by the end of the 27-28 school year. And we do these projections so that districts and counties and the state, they work with us to ensure that we don't end that 27-28 year with a negative ending balance. Because as you can guess, school districts aren't allowed to have negative bank account balances. And that's why these projections are so important, is so that we have an early warning that tells us if we don't take action, we will go negative, and then we're going to have very significant financial issues with likely involvement from the county and the state. So because we had that projection of a negative bank account balance in June, when the current year budget was approved, the district was also required to approve what's called the fiscal stabilization plan. A fiscal stabilization plan is many districts are, when they're facing a financial outlook like we are, where we're projecting negative balances, the county and state will require the district to submit and approve a fiscal stabilization plan. And what that fiscal stabilization plan in June was basically a preliminary plan for how the district would address the projected negative ending balance, that projected overdrawn bank account. So I'm going to go through the fiscal stabilization plan. This was again approved, the preliminary plan approved by the board in June. And the first one was a reduction of the Board of Education approved Fund 17 by 10% or $50 million. This was transferring money from a special reserve that the board set up, that the district set up, in order to offset some of that deficit that we're facing, in order to prevent cuts that otherwise might need to happen. Number two is reassess school carryover policies for starting next school year. This refers to school carryover in two programs, the Student Equity Needs Index, or SENI, as well as the General Fund School Program. Those are the two major carryover programs. And I think folks are familiar with school carryover, but I'll just briefly explain that in certain allocations that schools receive, at the end of the year, when there are any leftover funds, they have been allowed to carry over at the school level. And so schools would then have those funds available the following school year for their use. And so what this preliminary plan proposed was no longer having carryover in those two major programs, the SENI and the General Fund School Program. And so that would start next school year. So from this year into next school year, the proposal was for there to no longer be carryover. And the having the carryover at zero, again, is allowing the district to offset the deficit that it's facing and to prevent the need for cuts elsewhere that might otherwise be necessary. Item number three is targeted funding allocation reductions, also starting next school year. This is a reference to SENI, the Student Equity Needs Index, again, that supplemental allocation that schools receive. Back in June, the proposal was to reduce it by $75 million. What this refers to, so the idea was, while SENI for the last several years has been maintained at $700 million, we have had fewer students each year. And so the concept was keep the per student amount at the same levels as the 2021 school year, 2021 school year. And that was going, at the time in June, was resulting in that reduction of $75 million. But the proposal was to move forward with whatever the recalculation is that keeps the per student, the average per student amount, at the same levels as they were in the first year that SENI was $700 million, is what the proposal was. The fourth item is a reduction in unfunded positions starting next school year for $60 million. What this refers to is as schools develop their budgets for the current school year, and as well as central offices, there were several positions that were not budgeted. So again, several months ago, when schools and central offices were developing their budgets for the current school year, there were several positions that schools and other budget holders decided not to budget. However, the district did not move forward with any layoffs. There were no employee layoffs. So what happens when a position is not budgeted or a position is closed, but the district does not go through the process to lay off employees, is those impacted employees whose positions were closed are retained by the district. They stay with the district. They stay employed with the district. And so there were about $60 million worth of those positions where the employees were not laid off, but the positions were closed. And so the district had to maintain those positions. And so the plan that was adopted in June, the preliminary plan was to permanently eliminate those positions and lay off the impacted employees. Item number four is to consolidate the district footprint and campuses and programs. What this refers to is the district is actively working on assessing the needs across the district to identify potential opportunities to consolidate programs and campuses. Item number six is to reassess the effectiveness or earmarked or unspent investments for $115 million. What this refers to is the district often has funds in our bank account that are not fully unrestricted because they've been earmarked or set aside for a specific purpose, program, or project. Number five, I talked about. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah. No, it's okay. Back on number 6, these again are the funds that have been earmarked or set aside. And so what the district does is every year they take a look at any funds that have been set aside for that specific purpose or project or program to assess whether they're still needed to be set aside for that specific program and process. And when it's determined that they may not be needed for those programs or projects, they can then be used instead to offset the deficit or to offset the need for reductions that might otherwise be necessary. Number 7 is the strategic closure of vacant school positions annually in February for an estimated savings of $100 million. This refers to positions that have been budgeted at a school. It would exclude any positions that are budgeted in general fund restricted. So think programs like Title I would be excluded from this. But the idea is that in the second half of the school year, if a position at a school continues to be vacant or unfilled, and is unlikely to be filled given how deep we are into the school year, that those positions might be closed again around February in the second half of any school year to generate savings. Item number 8 is bringing students closer to their school of residence. The idea here is that the district is assessing the needs of our students and those who have special education programs require transportation, sometimes far from where they live, to be able to provide the desired and required programs for these students closer to where they live. The idea would be that not only do students benefit by being in programs closer to home, but that there would be a reduction in transportation costs for those same students. And then finally, number 9 is central operations and non-school-based reductions. This refers to reductions in central office programs and supports. So even though every program in the district, every dollar spent is for the benefit of our schools and students, this strategy, this proposed reduction is to the central office programs and supports that are provided to our schools. So you'll see here that at the bottom of the first column, the estimated savings in the first year, starting next school year, would be a little bit over $1 billion. The estimated savings in the following school year, the 27-28 school year, would be almost $600 million, totaling exactly $1.6 billion, which is the amount needed to address that projected negative bank account balance that I discussed a couple slides previously. And so these proposed reductions that were approved by the board in June were what was necessary to address the projected deficit back in June, based on the projection back in June. But I did mention there were several things that were not included in that projection, potential increases in compensation, any bad news we might get on federal funding levels. And so it is possible that there may be additional reductions that will be necessary beyond this plan. And I think another important thing to point out is that if we were to reduce less than the items in this preliminary plan, the district, based on current projections, would need to then identify other solutions, other reductions in place of anything here that we might do differently. And I do see some questions in the chat and at the end of my presentation before we get into the exercise where we're going to get your feedback. I'll do my best to answer those questions. So I think actually now might be a good time to answer some of these questions. So over the 10-year graph, 8 of the 10 years showed a budget surplus. What are the leading causes of the massive deficit that occurred in 24-25 and projected for the current year? The last 2 years show a stark and negative trend, one that needs to be explained. So I tried to address this, but basically the reason why we had many years of surpluses and then very large surpluses or very large years where we had large revenues in excess of our expenditures was primarily due to the pandemic. And so we had very high levels of funding, not just from the federal, but also the state government. And we were able to put those funds into our reserve, into our bank account. And now those funds are gone. Okay, so now those funds are gone. And we don't expect any additional funding like that to be coming our way from the federal government. And in fact, what we fear is that there may actually be reductions in even the current levels of federal funding. So that is part of the reason why why that trend exists. And I know the question was, what about outside of those two trends? But those are the major contributors for why we had those large increases in revenues as compared to our expenditures. And so with that funding gone and with our costs increasing, we have continued declining enrollment. And now that we don't have the same level of funding from the federal and state government, we're really seeing the impact of declining enrollment. Whereas for many years, because we had a high level of funding, that kind of masked or overcame the impact of declining enrollment. And so this is not a trend that's unique to LAUSD. Many districts are facing the same trajectory where they had many years of surpluses for the same reasons we did. And then starting last year and some even sooner, they saw the opposite start to happen, where the spending was higher than the revenue, and that money was dipping into reserves. And other districts were also required, like us, to put forward a fiscal stabilization plan. And unfortunately, many districts have already begun to reduce supports and services for schools, even starting in the current school year, and the necessary layoffs that also came with it. Next question is, do staff raises come from unrestricted reserve fund? Aren't there other restricted places where monies come from? So yes, the cost of a salary increase is paid for by whatever resource fund or program pays for that position. So the vast majority of our kinder through 12th grade programs are in the general fund unrestricted. There are some general fund restricted programs that do pay for a lot of school resource, for example, Title I or the ELOP, the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program. And then we also have other operating funds like our cafeteria fund. Our cafeteria fund pays for the staff that's necessary to operate the food program. We also have adult education fund that pays for the employees within our adult education program. We have our child development fund, which pays for employees within our preschool programs. And so depending on where the employees are paid for, the cost of salary increases will be paid for by that fund. However, the vast majority of our kinder through 12th grade education program is funded in general fund unrestricted. Another question is, I wonder the same, did the district spend their full budget for the year? Yeah, we can ask questions. Yeah, we'll get to your questions. Buenos días. Yeah, for those on the online, since I addressed a few questions that were on the Zoom, we're gonna answer some of the questions for the folks that are here in person.
Ok, buenos días. Mi pregunta es porque nos están dando esta presentación demasiado tarde, ok. Ya son como 6 o 7 meses que se aprobó por el board. Entonces, ¿cuál va a ser la interacción? ¿Cómo vamos a trabajar? Solo estoy escuchando todo lo que ya pasó, lo que ya se aprobó, lo que se designó. ¿Cuál va a ser la interacción de nosotros para esta presentación? Porque están de cosas y no nos consultaron. Y creo que lo lógico tendría que haber sido es que consultaran a los comités, ok, de padres que estamos aquí con mucho tiempo, con procesos y todo, y que no nos tomen en cuenta en el tiempo real antes de aprobar por el board estos presupuestos. ¿Por qué? Porque nosotros estamos en las escuelas y sabemos qué se está implementando mal y cómo se debe de cambiar. Entonces, si ustedes no hacen ese cambio, ¿verdad? Como ahorita que nos está haciendo la presentación, que aquí en el 2022 tuvimos tanto dinero, pero no nos dijo cómo se implementó para el siguiente año y se está viendo la reducción por el bajo enrollment de estudiantes. ¿Cómo es que nosotros ahorita vamos a apoyar o a recomendar, como se los he dicho en el CENI? ¿Cuántos años programamos ese trabajo para las escuelas? Se implementó, se les pidió que se hiciera una criteria para el CENI. No lo hicieron y se quedó abierta esa criteria y todo el mundo en las escuelas compraron posiciones para impacto de los estudiantes, para esto, para el otro, y no implementaron en verdad el dinero que era para materiales de instrucción de estudiantes, ¿ok? No se hizo. Son muy contadas las escuelas que yo tengo que se implementó para ese dinero. La mayoría lo implementó para posiciones. Entonces, sí, déjenme termino. Entonces, es ahorita mi pregunta, ¿qué es lo que usted quiere de nosotros? ¿Cuál es la expectativa de nosotros? Si esto, ¿cómo lo podemos cambiar? ¿O va a impactar en algo que nosotros demos una recomendación y que el board lo tome en cuenta y cambie el proceso del presupuesto y nos invite y diga o vengan y digan, ok, esto se va a tomar en cuenta para recomendación de los padres, para los estudiantes? Gracias.
Okay, so today we are going to get your feedback on the three questions that I went over earlier, and they're the same questions that we are getting feedback on throughout the district. So I know that some of you were able to join some of the town halls we had in each board district, and so the presentation and the questions will be very familiar to you if folks were able to attend one of those town halls. But we're going to get your feedback again on those three questions today. And then we also highlighted earlier in the presentation different opportunities for you to provide feedback. So there are existing these committee structures that where you'll be able to provide input, for example, on the LCAP. And depending on the committee that you sit on, you'll still have an opportunity to participate through that existing process in order to provide feedback. I also highlighted some upcoming board meetings that go from today all the way through June when the board will finally vote for next year's budget, where there's an opportunity to participate and engage in the process. And of course, at the school level, there's always the opportunity to participate in your individual school process, either through the coffees with the principal or school site council meetings, whatever. Each school has opportunities where there'll be a topic of discussion will be the school budget for the upcoming school year. Now, the budget process is happening earlier than it used to, and I know folks are familiar with that because that was true also last year, when the budget development cycle, the process started much earlier. And so it is earlier in the process, but the budget isn't finally or officially approved until June. And so there are still a lot of opportunities for you to provide feedback, including today when we get to the thought exchange questions that we're going to walk through, as well as the existing committee structures. So if there are no other questions for folks in person, I can try to address a few more of the questions in the chat, or I also see Ms. Franco with her hand up. Ms. Franco, do you want to go ahead?
Sí, buenos días, gracias.
Buenos días.
Coincido con la señora Carrión, porque a mí se me hace esto realmente una falta de respeto, puesto que hemos trabajado muy duro, sobre todo en lo que es el fondo del CENI. Estuvimos horas y horas, noches, todo el día en esa torre de ese edificio, peleando ese dinero para que trajeran para beneficio de nuestros estudiantes. Y siempre pedimos que se hiciera que hubiera un comité, un subcomité que monitoreara ese dinero. Nos damos cuenta que hicieron lo que les dio su regalada gana. Nunca se implementó como el CENI lo pedía, que fuera implementado para material de instrucción para los estudiantes. Ahora, ustedes ya aprobaron todo este presupuesto. ¿Cuál es el plan? What is the plan to have the meeting right now with the subcommittee to present this to show us the board already approved the budget? So what is the point for this meeting? It's just
So
time.
the plan that I showed you was not, sorry, go ahead.
How, as a PAC member, my comment on my feedback going to impact now? They already approved the budget. We don't have more budgets. We don't have more money to get it for our schools. Right now, our schools looking for for something else. For example, every day I go to talk to the companies, and thank God, I have a lot of sponsors this year to support our programs. They're really impacting to my school, because the money for the district, they always have excuses to use into our schools. And that money is for the students. I see more impact for the money that my sponsors sending directly to my programs. They see it impacting directly into them more than the money that the district has. That's very incredible. The money for the district is more impacting to your pocket than the student's life, than the student education. Okay? If you ask me how many companies I have for JRTC, for special A, for foster kids, for athletics, I can tell you, and I can give you the names of the companies, and I can also tell you how much money they're sending directly to my programs. And the money for the district, we not really see impacting to the school. Right now, my school, they have a very bad instructor. The instructor of the building. This raining, it's failed the ceiling. The district don't have money for that, to fix that. So they don't have money to fix the ceiling for my school. What I need to do? To ask another sponsors to get money to fixing my school? I'm tired. I'm so tired to see how much you guys got the money for our students. I prefer 1,000% to go talk directly to the companies and get a sponsor for the program for the schools that I have, because that's the only I see that they're really impacting more than the money from the district. Right now, I can say thank you, Trump, that you take the money for the federal money, because what I see in our schools, they don't really see the money impacting the district money impacting to the students.
So I just want to clarify, this fiscal stabilization plan was required. The district was required to prepare one and have a board vote on it. It does not set the budget for next school year. The budget for next school year has not been determined. The budget for next school year is approved by the board in June. Now, of course, it's being worked on now. Obviously, it's being worked on now because schools are starting their process for budget development. And we have to make certain assumptions for what the level of funding will be. But the board, when they were voting on the fiscal stabilization plan, first, again, it was a requirement. The county required this to happen. And is not setting the budget for next school year. It was a preliminary plan. I use the word preliminary on purpose. But I need to be honest and frank that reductions are unfortunately necessary at the district level. And again, we're not the only district facing this issue, because many districts are facing the same declining enrollment, expiration of COVID funds that we are. We are not immune to those same issues, those same challenges. And so you may still see many of these proposed reductions in this plan. You may see them as part of the final budget for next school year. But I think that there were some questions about, well, why are we meeting today if next year's budget has already been set? And I just want to clarify that next year's budget has not been finalized and set, that is something that happens, the end of that process happens in June. So I know that there are a lot of hands up and questions in the chat, but I think maybe it'll be helpful just to make sure that we have enough time to get your feedback on the 3 questions that I read over earlier, is to go through that, spend some time doing that. And then after we do that, we will come back to answer as many questions as I can. But I want to make sure that there's enough time to go through those 3 questions that we have for today. Okay, so I'm going to go again to those 3 questions, and I'm going to have some, you'll see in a moment, we're going to have some QR codes that you can use, as well as the link that you can use on the computer to get to the page where you'll be providing some responses to these questions. But again, the first question is, how can we make the district and school budget process more accessible and meaningful to you? Number two, equity, student-centered decision. And you don't have to write all these questions down. They're going to be on the thought exchange pages when you use the QR code or the web address. But I just want to read them again. Equity, student-centered decision-making, and valuing the workforce are board guiding principles. What do these principles mean to you? What resources and programs do you value at your school? And then number three, what are your thoughts on the district's plan to address the deficit? And so here on the next slide, you'll see both a QR code. If you want to use your phone, the QR code will take you to the thought exchange page where you'll be able to provide responses to those three questions. Also in both the chat as well as on the slide, you'll see the web address or the URL, the hyperlink, where you'll also be able to, if you're on your computer instead of on your phone, where you'll be able to also access the thought exchange page where you can provide answers to those three questions. When you go to that thought exchange page, this is on the screen here, you'll see where you'll be able to select the language. And so if you want to select a language other than English, you'll do so on that first screen where you'll be able to select the language and then you can get started. And again, here is the QR code, and I'm going to go back to this slide so you can see both the QR code and the web address. And also, again, it's been put into the chat a couple times where if you click on the link in the chat, it'll also take you to the same place. So I think we're going to pause for about 20 to 25 minutes to give you time to respond to questions. What I'll do is I'll check in after about maybe 20 minutes and see if folks are finished, then we can certainly then move on to more question and answers. But we'll set a timer for about 20 minutes and please go ahead and either click on the link or use the QR code to access the thought exchange page.
would like to contribute your response as a group. We're gonna go back and when we finish, we'll go back and share some of the highlights of what was provided. So I see, Mr. Roback, that you have your hand up. And first question we have is, how can we make the district and school budget process more accessible and meaningful to you?
Well, Lucio, I have to chuckle as you're reading that question. I think SFACE and the budget office has severely underestimated the level of concern among members of the CAC, DLAC, and PAC, justifiably so, on the not only the budget situation within our district, but also at the, I will use the word in air quotes, quality of the presentation here. There seems to be a lot of beating around the bushes financially, and something less than total honesty and candor in assessing and reporting to parent leaders of this district what the actual financial situation is in their district. We've heard for years about a financial cliff, about $5 billion being hidden by the district, and maybe this is a union talking point at negotiating time, but just leading us through these three questions, and it's no offense to you, sir. We've known each other many years, as you know. But this sort of feels like we're being led in a kindergarten exercise when we really need the ability to get some hard answers to our hard questions. And there's no way that can be accomplished by reading aloud selected chat questions and trying the best Mr. Karimi Bravo Karimi can do. We need to have a real sit down across the board of all three committees in person, ideally, but at the very least, just merely going through three questions in breakout sessions, with much respect to all staff here, doesn't work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Roback.
respectfully, Paul, that's exactly what I thought this meeting was. I thought it was more collaborative and we could have discussions, and it's the same questions you guys are asking us at every meeting.
Yes,
Yeah, it doesn't seem like an actionable time.
Yeah.
I think Sonia had too much turkey. She's still in that coma.
Okay. Any other response to this question? I see, Ms. Lacey, you have your hand.
Yeah, there's obviously no transparency. Everyone's very upset. All of this is being given very much after the fact with no conversation whatsoever. Several of the points that were made of reduction, obviously I'm here as part of the CAC. We represent students with IEPs and special needs. Several of the points and reductions made severely impact students' ability to have their right of IDEA seen and formed. Point number 8, to bring IEP students closer to their school of residence makes no sense. It's quite frankly illegal. The placement is decided in the IEP process. Many of the programs are shut down locally, so they can't go to the closest place unless you're going to switch a placement and put a child where they're not supposed to be. The reason why they're traveling to be in these programs is because they have to go where the programs are. And as budgets are cut and as programs are closed, they have to go further and further, my household included. And this gets worse and worse as you go throughout the regions, where the funding is less and less because it is not equitable across regions. So you're really talking about some of these cuts going after the most vulnerable students that there are in LAUSD. And I'm very upset to see many of the points that were being made today.
Thank you, Ms. Lacey. So you see what I'm tapping if I missed something that you mentioned, that let me know and I'll make sure to.
I will individually input my thoughts.
Oh, that's
well.
right.
Just wanted to share at this level.
Thank you, Ms. Lacey. And so with about 10, well, we have time. Yes, Ms. Palma, you have your hand up. Thank you, Ms. Palmer. So moving on to the second question. This one is asking about equity, which was mentioned earlier. Equity, student-centered decision-making, and valuing the workforce are board guiding principles. What do these principles mean to you? What resources and programs do you value at your school? Oh, Ms. Lacy, did you still have your hand up? Or okay, thank you, Ms. Lacy. Ms. Franco, yes.
¿Ya pasaron la pregunta 2?
Esta es la dos. Yes. This is question number 2.
Bueno, pues
Um,
por lo mismo
sí,
para la 1 y para la 2 y para todas las que vienen, pues saben
¿me
perfectamente
lo
bien.
quiere decir en inglés, Ms. Franco?
No, se lo voy a decir en español porque estoy demasiado enojada.
Okay, okay.
Estoy perdiendo el tiempo aquí con ustedes. Yo
Then,
estoy ocupada
okay.
aquí en la escuela.
I will write it down and then I will translate it for the group.
Ok,
Adelante, Ms. Franco.
estoy totalmente en desacuerdo en todo lo que están haciendo ahorita porque esto se me hace una falta de respeto, se me hace una burla la manera de cómo nos están haciendo las cosas, porque ¿qué quieren escuchar de los comités cuando ya el distrito y la mesa directiva ya aprobó? Igual con como dice la señora María Palma, vinimos por años pidiendo a LCAP que nos muestre el presupuesto. Quieren que hagamos nosotros aportaciones sin conocer el presupuesto. Yo siempre he puesto de ejemplo, ¿cómo voy a mandar al bodoque a comprarme una cartera de huevos con $1 cuando la cartera de huevo cuesta $5? Entonces, yo no puedo hacer una aportación cuando yo desconozco del dinero que hay. Ahora, ya están entre la espada y la pared. Nos traen un presupuesto donde dicen, perdimos dinero, perdimos dinero, perdimos dinero, perdimos dinero, perdimos dinero. O sea, ya cuando ven la gata toda alborotada, es cuando quieren buscar quién la emborató. Y las cosas no son así. El distrito tiene que aprender a respetarnos a los padres. El distrito tiene que aprender a respetar nuestro tiempo. A ustedes les pagan, a nosotros no. ¿Ok? Y esto es una burla, es una falta de respeto que vengan a preguntarnos y a querernos a presentar algo que ya ustedes ya tomaron la decisión. Ustedes ya tienen su dinero, ya lo tienen distribuido. ¿Cuánto le va a tocar al bolsillo de Carvalho? ¿Cuánto le va a tocar al bolsillo de usted? ¿Cuánto le va a tocar al bolsillo de Plasencia? ¿Cuánto le va a quedar al bolsillo de Miss Megan? Mientras a nosotros los estudiantes, como he dicho, veo más, y es una vergüenza, que veo más el dinero impactado de nuestros patrocinadores que mandan el dinero directamente a los programas, que todo el dinero que tiene el distrito para lo que supuestamente es cubrir las necesidades de los estudiantes. Se acaba de caer el techo del baño de aquí de los maestros, con las poquitas lluvias. No quiero imaginarme cuando venga el tormentón. Pedí que se hiciera una inspección de estructura. He pedido por años que manden presupuesto para arreglar las estructuras de mi escuela. Iba en la número 5,000. La última vez que chequeé, la número 3,000 para que hagan reestructuración de la estructura de aquí. ¿Qué están esperando? ¿Que pase una tragedia? ¿Porque el distrito no tiene dinero? ¿O quieren que me vaya a hablar con compañías, con Home Depot y con todas para que nos patrocinen y que nos arreglen la escuela? Porque el distrito no tiene dinero. Entonces, en realidad, esto es una vergüenza. Esto es una falta de respeto que nos pongan a decir, vamos a tener la reunión del presupuesto cuando ustedes ya aprobaron el maldito presupuesto.
Let me go ahead and translate for you. Voy a traducirle, Ms. Franco. Gracias. So Ms. Franco expresses that kind of the same feelings that she's completely in disagreement that this is a show of disrespect and a joke. The district wants to listen when the board members already approved, is what Ms. Franco said. As it was mentioned earlier, the LCAP has not been reviewed or presented. I cannot make a contribution or regarding my comments or ideas when I do not know where the money is or what the money, how much money there is. there isn't a budget. No, they bring us a budget where money has already been lost, where there's already a deficit for a couple of years, and they want us to solve this. The district needs to respect parents and our time. To ask us is a joke for something that's already been decided. The pockets of the staff has already been determined, and I see that the money from sponsors provides more impact than in order to cover the needs of students. Okay, so maybe one more person regarding this question. Any other hands up that we have in our group? Okay, then we can go ahead and move on to question number 3. What are your thoughts on the district's plan to address the deficit? What was presented to you on the way that the district wants to approach this? What are your thoughts on that approach? And is Ms. Sonia here in this group? No. Is Ms. Sonia in this group?
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I'm sorry, Ms. Sonia. Yes, I saw you were here. Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you.
yes.
One of the things that Saman keeps mentioning, but he's not really being very clear about, is that we need to lay off staff. We have one of the other parents was asking in the chat, how are these expenses so high? Well, that's because as we were hiring people with all of the COVID dollars, we never let anybody go. And now that we have all this staff, one of the union proposals is to make all of these part-time staff now full-time, essentially doubling the expense of all of these employees. And there's no work for them all to do. So that means you have to cut half of the staff that we have. If you give them full-time work, that means you cut the number of people in half. And that's not being made clear. So what's my plan to address it? I think my thoughts on your plan to address it. You just need to be more clear. Just be honest and say what you're not saying. The part that you're saying in a nice, sweet, gentle way, you need to just rip off the Band-Aid and say it. When you say that you're moving kids closer to their school, then you're making it sound like a transportation issue. It's not a transportation issue. You're saying that you're closing programs. So just say that you're closing programs. If you say that, and whatever it is, I mean, I can't think now of if you want to put the list up, we can go one by one, but you're just saying it in some other way that's not saying what you really want to say. And that's going over a lot of people's heads. Then when it comes time to layoffs, everybody's going to say, well, where did that come from? We never knew you were going to lay off. We never knew you were going to close schools. That's what you're saying, but you're not saying it. So let's just be clear about the reality.
Thank you, Ms. Ryder. We have Mr. Ruffin with your hand up.
Yes, I agree. Sonia made some very good points that I want to reiterate. But the information was good and it's necessary, but you don't just give bad news without options. And I think he could do a better job of reviewing options, such as how would going virtual on some programs and resources be helpful by going like more group virtual. For example, that's just one example. Another is what programs have we examined for effectiveness? If programs are not year after year not giving results, then that's the first programs that should be looked at as to reducing. So what prioritization is being used to determine where cuts need to be made? Volunteerism. Some of the, if you've lived long enough, you realize that there was a time when there was more community activism in the schools. And maybe in some ways we have become spoiled in that programs that we now take for granted, maybe parents can become more involved. What plans of options have been discussed as to how to include more parent involvement as volunteers or as you know to assist the schools because I believe that a number of parents would volunteer if the call went out, sort of like that Field of Dreams movie. If you build it, they will come. If you make the opportunity available, some parents will come. Some can't, but some parents, some grandparents will come. So my complaint is that you're giving bad news without giving options, and that's where you're disrespecting your families and PAC members and CAC members by not discussing options to that we can make. It's just, again, if he wants to make a comparison to a familial budget, I don't do things, make major decisions in the family budget without discussing it with my wife and sometimes my children. And in some ways, I think we're feeling that that's being done. We have to tighten the belt. If we have to, cut back on some programs, that's fine. But the options should be discussed equally.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then I see Ms. Hobson, you have your hand up. Ms. Hobson, if you could unmute yourself, go ahead and give us your response. Or while we wait for Ms. Hobson, I see Mr. Crown. Good morning, Mr. Crown.
Morning, Lucio. So, I mean, I could go on for like an hour. There's so much here.
I think we have 5 minutes.
To Eugene's point, we can only build it if the people at the school sites actually want us to help. And we've talked at PAC about this significantly. The fact is, this is the largest catch-22 you could have. We're sitting here saying parents are willing to help, except that the district doesn't want parents to help, because when you help, you have an opinion. And the fact is, we don't have any power standing here. That's one. I'm looking at this presentation, and it is wholly irresponsible to come to parents and say, we have a budget of $12.5 billion and we don't have enough money. There's thousands of programs. There are thousands of moving parts into what makes up this budget. We're not being given any of the details that make up the budget deficit. How on earth are we as parents supposed to be able to provide constructive feedback when we are being given the 50,000-foot summary view? I'm an accountant by trade. This is what I do. I want to understand the details of where we're spending money, where we are wasting money, how we are allowing facilities to degrade, how we're overspending on programs, even though we've had a 26.5% reduction in enrollment. What the hell are we doing about a 26% reduction in enrollment? There is so much here, and the fact that we are only being given this summary stuff, we are pushed to thought exchange, which is an absolute waste. The fact that SFace is not recording the chat so that a master list of all of the questions can be saved, answered, and returned to all of the parent level committees. This whole day leaves an absolutely horrible taste in my mouth, just as a parent, as a graduate of this district, and as the chair of the PAC. This is very well done. And I want to just end with the comment that Ms. Palma made, that this information is several months old. And here we are now on December 1st, just getting it.
Thank you, Mr. Crown. Okay. So we are about to return, I believe. Let me check the chat. Okay. All right. So with a minute left, anyone would like to add anything to any of the questions that we have here?
Me, I just want to say regarding about the parents volunteer. It's not easy to convince parents to be volunteer, especially when on the school side you are considered a troublemaker. So another thing, it's volunteering is just donate time. We need to keep all the positions that we have on campuses. Like, for example, for supervision, if we ask the parents to
Yeah. Okay. People are going to come off mute, or should I go through the chat again? With that? Okay. Okay, I think we'll take another question from folks here in person if there are any additional questions. I know folks had asked a few questions over the last 20 minutes, but if not, I'll go to a question from the folks that are online. Yeah, we're going to try to keep it. I know folks also want to share a lot of information as part of the questions, which is fine, but just to make sure everyone gets an opportunity, we're going to try to keep it to 2 minutes. Okay. So, and then I'll respond as quickly as I can just to give an opportunity for other folks. Thanks.
Gracias por la oportunidad que... ¿Sí oyen los del Zoom? ¿Sí oyen los del Zoom? Sí. Sí, gracias por la oportunidad que me dan a mí de opinar. Bueno, he estado ocupada ahí viendo unas cosas también, pero he oído cada una de mis compañeras acá y no estamos estamos en desacuerdo todos con respecto a esta información y no estamos en contra de usted. Simple y sencillamente queremos decir que la información no se ha consultado a los comités con anticipación, ¿verdad? Es como cuando van a dar una información muy importante, estamos hablando de millones de dinero. Hola, qué hermoso. Mira qué bonito. El color. Tienen que avisar a los comités, porque no se va a invertir también para lo que es, para el aporte, para el involucramiento de padres. Entonces, lo que yo estoy observando nomás es que nos quieren restringir. Con todo esto, usted dijo algo hace un momento también, que esto todavía no se ha cerrado. ¿O correcto?
Correcto.
Entonces, bueno, lo lógico es que usted observe cada comentario que hizo cada mamá o cada padre en Zoom y presente para que se pueda agregar y después nos traiga otra información ya actualizada con la información que estamos hablando nosotros, porque realmente acá va a haber muchos padres. De tantos padres que hay, de más de 2,000 padres que hay, muchos más, lo vemos pocos padres, pero estamos interesados por el bienestar de nuestros hijos y por todos los niños. Ahora, tal vez nosotros no podamos estar ahí sentados en oficinas grandes como ustedes, pero estamos observando y no es como que hacerle una crítica destructiva, estamos haciendo una crítica ahora sí constructiva para que todos vamos ayudando a formar este distrito escolar y para que también nosotros vayamos teniendo esa equidad como padres y los alumnos y tanto el distrito escolar en general. ¿Por qué? Porque estamos viendo todo esto y sí hay cosas como que no las podemos entender. Ahora, sería bueno, ¿verdad? Bajarse a un nivel como padre o como madre para que más ampliamente información. Y por favor, si puede traernos actualizadamente con los comentarios que ya hicimos para que haya mejor movimiento en el distrito escolar y para que esos déficits, mire, hoy, si ustedes oyeran más a los papás, aquí ellos no son ingenieros ni doctores, pero yo los respeto con todo respeto a cada uno. Tenemos defectos a montón, pero tienen inteligencia, que deberían de estar en unos puestos grandes ahí también, pero ¿sabe qué? Tomen importancia en las palabras, porque eso lleva al éxito.
Gracias. Maybe we'll go someone online. I see some hands raised. I think the first hand I see raised is Maria Palma. Thank you. Any other questions inside the room?
Oh, he had read.
Sorry, that's my fault.
It's okay. Okay, yo tengo dos preguntas.
Yes, I have two questions. What I'm interested in knowing is, well, I've been part of the PAC and part of the DLAC.
Necesitamos también en el PAC que se haga la criteria del CENI, oficialmente, la criteria que describa en qué se van a implementar esos fondos y para qué. Mis preguntas son, ¿están los fondos en partidas específicas para servicios, personal, docentes, terapeutas y los especialistas y materiales y tecnología? Esa es una pregunta. La segunda es, ¿cuáles son los nuevos indicadores con la inclusión de éxito para el presupuesto de educación especial? Esas son mis dos preguntas.
La primera pregunta, sorry, the first question was about special education and and whether the budget is budgeted in things like supplies and different therapeutic services. And I mean, the answer is yes, it is budgeted in all those things. The way the special education budget is determined is mostly driven by the individual students' IEP, the individual education plan, and whatever the required services and supports that are outlined in those plans. And so ultimately, the number of different types of employees that we have within the program is determined based on those student identified needs and the requirements in order to provide those services. And so that is at a very high level and how the special education budget is determined. I'm not sure if that was your question. In terms of the indicators for like effectiveness of programs, that's something I'm not myself involved in, and I'm sorry I can't speak in much detail about the indicators that are used by the program to identify.
Necesitamos saber ese punto, porque en base a eso necesitamos ver qué tan efectivos están implementándose esos programas y el costo para poder nosotros verificar qué tan efectivo ha sido para poderlo implementar para el próximo año, porque si no hay un seguimiento de es bueno o no, viene otro comité, otros padres implementan otra cosa, se quitan programas que sí son efectivos y necesitamos saber en base al presupuesto poderlo implementar, ¿me entiende? O poderlo solucionar. Muchas veces no pasa esto y se pierde el interés y el presupuesto se pierde también.
We're going to take another question in person, and then we'll come to Ms. Diana Guillen.
Buenos días a todos. Bueno, más que una pregunta es un comentario, ¿verdad? Que quiero hacer porque es importante. Lo que habíamos estado hablando aquí en el grupo chico, los que estamos aquí presentes, es que la información que nos dan o la presentación que hizo ustedes, le falta información, o sea, le falta carne, como que nomás nos dieron los huesos aquí, y sorry que lo ponga en ese prospecto porque quiero que todos me entiendan, ¿verdad? De que nos ponen aquí de que evaluemos el punto 1, 2, 3 hasta el punto 9 sobre los recortes que piensan hacer el distrito, que ya lo aprobaron, pero que todavía se puede cambiar y todo eso que están diciendo. La verdad es que queda muy vaga la información. Yo lo que estoy escuchando de los padres, están cada uno hablando de sus escuelas, de sus problemas, pero realmente aquí venimos a hablar de todo el distrito. Entonces, la información, como la están presentando, no está llegando a lo que ustedes nos quieren preguntar. Y todo lo que van a encontrar aquí no va a ser lo que ustedes necesitan. ¿Por qué? Porque no se está entendiendo la información. Esta de poner en el punto 2 una sola línea de información, no, a mí no se me queda, lo siento, pero en una junta no se me va a quedar la información. Si la veo escrita, la puedo repasar. A mí me preocupa aquí que dicen que reducciones de operaciones de las escuelas, pero muchos padres no saben ni qué significa operaciones. Y ustedes están haciendo esa pregunta. Entonces, si no tiene, debe de estar la descripción de lo que operaciones hace. Y en mi experiencia, operaciones, pues yo no sé qué hace, ¿verdad? Porque no están trabajando de una manera efectiva. Tenemos que ver que todo lo que ellos hacen, cuáles son los problemas que ellos acuden, cómo los hacen, cómo mejoran las instalaciones, los problemas que hay en las escuelas, qué es realmente esto. Pero así nos preguntas, no, ni siquiera te aseguro nadie te va a contestar. Entonces, padres, cuando yo no entiendo algo, yo mejor no prefiero callarme, pregunto, pero ¿para qué voy a decir algo que no entiendo? Y el distrito se basa en cosas que no entienden para decir, ay, pues ya ven, ni nos dijeron nada, vamos a hacer lo que nosotros queramos. Y al final de cuentas, nuestros estudiantes son los que salen afectados. Gracias.
Thank you. I think online we have next Andrew Crown. Sorry if I mispronounced the name. Do you want to come off mute? Or did you lower your hand? Oh, okay. Andrew Crown.
Hi, did you guys call on me? It is very
Yes.
hard to hear you.
I'm sorry. Yes, I called on you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So my name is Andrew Crown, and I have the honor and the privilege of serving as the chair of this year's Parent Advisory Committee. Um, I'll make a general comment about the financials here in a minute, but I want to start with making a formal request as the chair of the PAC that you come to an added standalone PAC meeting. We meet from 10 to 1 and we have a real and meaningful dialogue about the budget and the fiscal stabilization plan where parents, you bring the resources you need to be able to answer our questions. That's first and foremost. Secondly, I am an accountant by trade, so this is my domain, and providing parents with the 50,000-foot view of what's the total expected revenue and expenditures does a grave disservice to the parents. The budget is made up, as we know, of thousands of moving parts. Yet, as parents, we aren't being provided with any of those details. How on earth could we provide any meaningful and specific comments on what is going on when we have virtually no access to the information? And I'll use just one very simple example, actually two. 10 years and a 26.5% decline in enrollment should terrify the district. If the district was a private entity, everyone involved would have been fired. What, and this is not to be answered now, what on earth is being done to convince parents and families that the district is truly where our children should be? And then I think, and I'll finish very quickly, I'm going to go over. I think there's a very myopic view by the district and various departments in it that generate revenue, i.e., Civic Center and facility rentals, where this is an opportunity that the district has to raise new funds from community groups who would like to utilize LAUSD facilities. And the pricing of those facilities and the rentals are so astronomical that those facilities sit wasted. They take funds to maintain and are not generating any revenue. That is just one example of what I think is a
Please
really
take 10
myopic
seconds
and
to wrap up
shallow
your
decision.
question.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I'll just briefly respond to some of the questions. With respect to enrollment, birth rates are down. People are having fewer kids, and unfortunately, that there's not a lot school districts throughout the state and country can do about that major factor, is that people are having fewer kids. Additionally, and this is true of a lot of high cost areas like Los Angeles, in addition to few people having fewer kids, there are a lot of folks who are moving out of the area due to housing costs being as high as they are. And so it's not the case that the district does nothing, has done nothing. The district takes great pains to promote the successes of its schools, the successes of its programs, and yet declining enrollment continues because the major factors are those that are a bit outside of the district's ability to change, in particular the number of kids that people are having. But recently, there's been even further issues impacting enrollment and attendance, which are fears about enforcement actions and related to immigration that have meant this year's enrollment was even lower than was already projected. We were already projecting lower enrollment, and it was even lower. And so we do a lot to try to reach out to families and parents in the community that their schools are safe and that their students will be taken care of. And but unfortunately, this is a national trend, and so I think you're right. In the private sector, there would be a lot of attention on this. There is a lot of attention on this, but The main factors are things that we have little ability to influence, unfortunately. So I think there was some other kind of suggestions and commentary that we certainly took note of, but the one on enrollment, I did want to provide at least a brief response to. I see a hand up, Gabriela Rangel.
Sí, gracias. Primero que nada, quiero darle las gracias por esta presentación y otra. Tenemos que reflexionar los tres DILAC, el CAC y el PAC, porque realmente hubo información desde el año pasado que nosotros ignoramos. Yo se los dije, va a haber cambios este año y lamentablemente que no hicieron caso, todos estuvieron en su ego, lamentablemente. No participaban en las escuelas como voluntarios, no estaban en el ILAC y en el excusa y caso ni en el liderazgo. Y estas son las consecuencias que se están haciendo. ¿Dónde están nuestros estudiantes que tanto estamos diciendo? En ningún lado. Los estudiantes están perjudicados y van a seguir perjudicados. Tenemos que reflexionar en decir basta y decir la educación es primero. Nuestros estudiantes nos están pidiendo ayuda, aunque no queramos, aunque digamos es que esto, el otro, no hay peros. La tecnología está avanzada y no saben esa tecnología también que les va a impactar a nuestros estudiantes como no tienen idea. Nosotros estamos aquí en el que tú fuiste, que yo fui, que pasó y no pasó. No, tenemos que ver en lo que viene en el del después, porque nos están alcanzando muchas cosas y nosotros estamos cegados en el pasado. Vivamos en el futuro, en lo que viene, porque lo que viene va a ser impactante para nuestros estudiantes. Reflexionemos y analicemos las cosas como son del momento y del futuro, no del después ni del que hubiera, porque el hubiera ya no existe. Gracias.
Talia Rogers. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Hi. To the previous question before the last, how are you addressing the lack of attendance? Outside of lower family rates, people are moving out of school districts because they don't see our schools as fit for their children in general. They don't think the buildings, the attention that teachers are giving their children, the level of education that the students are getting is lacking in general. There are people who are going to private schools and getting vouchers or student
I'm sorry,
educated. So how are you going to address those issues? How are you going to better the schools when we see all of these budgets being cut? Where's the funding going to address the actual needs of the students within the classroom? The parents don't see our schools as fit.
So yeah, I mean, no doubt there are families that could attend LAUSD schools and don't. But the main drivers of the declining enrollment over the last 2 decades plus are the things that I mentioned. So, but it doesn't mean that
I understand that. I'm asking, how are you going to address that specific thing? I know many parents within my neighborhood who are going like miles, 40 minutes to an hour outside of our school district just to see that their kids are safe and are educated.
Right.
You can retain these students, but you're choosing not to by not addressing the real thing. Our schools are really they're not great.
Well, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, and I'm not sure folks from the breakout room, but listen, I'm in the finance department. I'm not deeply involved in instruction, but our academic achievement has far outpaced the state. So our growth and achievement outpaced the growth of the statewide average. And so that is just one
only
example.
At specific schools. How can we spread that to the rest of our regions, to all of our regions, not just to certain regions?
No, and what I'm talking about applies to all grade levels, all student groups, not just certain areas and certain students. And so, and the district
That's
has been
not the
doing a
data
lot
I've
to,
seen.
I'm sorry?
That's not the data I've seen.
Okay, well, I mean, there's been a lot of publicity that the district is trying to get the word out about how much our students have improved from last year to this year, exceeding pre-pandemic levels of achievement. And while I'm not, as I mentioned, an expert in instruction and academic achievement, the data shows this, and it's available on the state's website. We've, as a district, promoted it a lot. And so the most important thing is that it's happening, not that it's being promoted. But to both of your questions about how do we get the word out, that is one way to try to bring attention to these achievements. Now, you're also pointing out, like, yeah, not every school is seeing that success, and yeah, that's an issue. And so the district has to continue to focus, as it does, on the achievement of every student. And with respect to the needs for facilities improvements, obviously the district works hard to make those improvements with the limited resources that it has, to improve the conditions of our school facilities. And so, but the desire to improve outcomes for our students is not only to get enrollment and therefore revenue. That's why we're here. That's the whole point of our existence as a school district, is to teach kids. And so even if there was no impact on enrollment and on revenue, we would be doing that. And so I hear what you're saying. I'm not trying to disagree with your concerns, but it's worth noting that there have been very, very significant improvements in student learning over the last few years, and that it's outpaced those gains at other districts and the statewide average, and it's just it's worth noting.
Are there any initiatives outside of the community and parent outreach teams to get more community involved? I know our parents are overwhelmed and overworked.
Sure.
But we need more community involvement in general, and that includes helping the infrastructure of our schools and making them safe places where people feel like they want to come help
You have
and
10
volunteer.
seconds.
Sorry, I'm not very knowledgeable about different community-based efforts, but we've noted your question. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Lacey?
Hi, thank you. You spoke a little bit on the funding for special education and how that goes about. And one of the points that I just want to bring up is definitely a funding issue as far as relying on the attendance-based model funding for special education, even though that doesn't really reflect the actual costs for educating students with disabilities.
That's right.
Most of our students have medical needs and therapy appointments, and the attendance portion of it is kind of unrealistic, even though the supports and the staff is still needed every single day, even though the students are not necessarily be able to be there. So I was wondering if there was any thought on the district's behalf of using different forms of funding for the special education students, because while attendance is going down, the number of IEPs in the district is almost doubling. So I was wondering if there was any thought around that, of getting different forms of funding for those students in order to look into some of those costs and budget. I also just wanted to make a quick comment on, I made it in the small group room. I'd like to make it here again, that the point that was brought up to bring students closer to their school of residence, the way that it is stated makes it seem like you're just trying to bring students closer. But when you went into it, it was about bringing special education students to programs closer to their homes. Many of the programs are being shut down. Students on IEPs need specific placements, and that is why they are being transported and taken to those schools that are further away. I'm wondering how it is legal within LAUSD to suggest that they not be taken to the right program, and how if there's any fear around prioritizing closeness to home over placement in the actual correct spot that the child deserves to be in.
Yeah. Let me address the second question first. So no, it's important to note, as I did, that it would be to bring students to the desired and required program closer to home, not to close a program and not provide what's necessary and required. Absolutely not. Any changes like this that result in shorter trips on the bus would only be done by providing the necessary and required programs. So not just from a legal standpoint, but from an educational standpoint as well. And so it's not, the idea isn't just to close a program and then no longer offer it. It only makes sense if we can provide the same program closer to home, and only do so if it allows for a student to be on the bus for less time than they currently are. And so if I explained it in a way that gave any impression otherwise, I apologize, but absolutely you're right that we have to continue to offer, not just from a legal standpoint, but from an educational standpoint as well, the necessary programs that meet the individual needs of our students as outlined in their IEPs. To your first question, yes, you're very right to point out the issues with the way special education is funded. First is generally there's not enough funding for special education. We have substantially higher costs than revenues that we receive for special education from both the state and federal government. And you're also right to point out one of the reasons why the funding is insufficient is that we're funded based on student enrollment and attendance instead of based on the needs of the students that we're actually serving. And so as a district, while we don't determine the funding rules that the state and federal government use, we do advocate very strongly for changes to those rules, given that not every district's the same. You pointed out correctly that while our overall enrollment's declining, the number of students that we have with IEPs is growing. And so the old formulas, the old ways that the state and federal government fund us are not sufficient. And so, but again, we don't set those formulas, but we do advocate very strongly for changes to them, given our unique needs. Okay, we're going to take one more question in the room and then one more online. Since you haven't asked a question yet.
Sí, pero ya te tocó. Bueno, mi pregunta es porque yo tengo un niño de educación especial y sí quiero cambios, como acabo de decir, porque los que van entrando al distrito nos ponen en la zona, no, póngalos los niños que son específicamente, póngalos donde tienen que estar, porque a mí me costó me lo pusieron en mi zona y me costó 6 meses, 7 meses para poderlo pasar a la escuela donde está ahorita. Y yo pedí esa escuela y no me la dieron. Y hay padres que están lo mismo, hay como 20 padres que tengo lo mismo y me están diciendo, ¿cómo le hiciste? Le digo, es que tienes que venir al BOR, pero hagan cambios en esos de educación especial que tengan porque el mío es sordo y síndrome de Down. Con síndrome de Down, no es, perdón, hay sordera con síndrome de Down, sordera y autismo. Y hay otras deficiencias y están llegando allá porque los están recomendando a esa escuela, porque muchos padres no saben de esa escuela. Y queremos que sean cambios para los niños de educación especial que tengan esas condiciones, que los refieran a esas escuelas para que no estemos batallando como padres. Porque a mí sí me costó, porque cuando entró, me costó pasarlo a esa escuela, porque yo ya conocí esa escuela, porque esa escuela tiene desde que tienen 2 años, están en un programa y están ahí y tienen audición. Por eso hay muchos cambios y por eso hay padres que prefieren agarrar otros programas para que les ayuden, pero mejor háganlo aquí para que tengan más alumnos y más padres contentos, porque sí como dices, se están demorando mucho en hacer esos procesos para esos niños.
porque yo tengo una mamá que también está peleando por eso. Gracias.
Okay, Ms. Guillen.
No, voy a ser breve porque yo sé que quiero que tal vez si alguien más puede participar. Pero cuando ustedes hablan acerca de que hemos perdido estudiantes, entonces tiene que reducir también los empleados, porque el problema aquí es que ustedes no quieren reducir los empleados, pero quieren tener el mismo volumen de empleados, pero están perdiendo estudiantes. Entonces no se puede eso, se tiene que balancear. Eso es algo que está pasando porque dice el distrito, no vamos a despedir a nadie, pero están teniendo menos estudiantes. ¿Y quiénes están perdiendo? Los niños. Y eso que usted dice acerca de que el Distrito Escolar de Los Ángeles ha mejorado académicamente, es una falacia. Y le voy a decir por qué. Porque hay unas escuelas que me han dicho los padres, oh, mi escuela está bien, pero cuando vamos a ver los números, está 100 puntos menos en matemáticas y eso es estar bien. O sea, porque estaban en 150 menos, ahora están en 100, menos 100. Entonces, eso no es, o sea, no es que la escuela esté bien. La escuela está menos peor, pero no quiere decir que está bien. Y cuando cada vez que yo me meto a una escuela que padres dicen, mi escuela está muy bien y yo voy y me meto aquí al dashboard y a revisar, eso no es cierto. Ahí es donde me doy cuenta que los padres, la información que les están dando en la escuela no es cierta. La información real es diferente. Entonces nos están queriendo meter en la cabeza de que, oh, estamos mejor que otros distritos, estamos mejor. Pero en realidad los niños no están avanzando académicamente y todos los días nos lo quieren poner en la computadora. Entonces, lo único que les puedo decir a los padres es que si no van ustedes a hablar al board, porque yo he sido la única presidenta que he ido a hablar al board y que he dicho todo esto que está pasando, pero ningún presidente, excepto de mí, ha ido al board, porque yo voy muchas veces al board a hablar de lo que está pasando, pero si van al board nomás a decir que todo está bien, entonces esto no va a cambiar y nuestros hijos van a seguir perdiendo. Gracias.
Okay, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Yeah, we did say 2 more questions. We can take one more question. Okay, Ms. Franco? One more question, Ms. Franco?
No, no ganó. Ay, sí, no ganó, Diana Guillén no ganó. Hey, solution, solution. Que empiecen a despedir a todo el personal del distrito en lugar de las escuelas. Es la mejor solución.
Y que vayan los padres.
Exacto. Entonces, ¿quieren soluciones? A empezar a hacer despedidas de personal del distrito que está ganando mucho dinero sin hacer nada. That's it. Thank you. I had to go.
Thanks. What's that? Okay, sure. I think I see one last hand up. I don't want to leave anybody out, but this really does have to be the final question. Ms. Carrion?
Sí, igual la solución. Tienen que ver ustedes que la prioridad son los maestros, como se lo dije, los maestros y material de instrucción, tecnología también. ¿Ok? Es lo que se tiene que agarrar del presupuesto para los estudiantes. Recuerden que estamos aquí por los estudiantes. Es la materia prima, los estudiantes. Si no hay estudiantes, se cierran las escuelas. No hay trabajo para todos ustedes. Entonces, tenemos que ver la prioridad, mantener a los estudiantes. Lo que yo estaba viendo ahorita con las compañeras en educación especial, y se lo voy a decir, no queremos la perspectiva que estaban diciendo, el choice, ¿ok? Las opciones. Estamos viendo como que quieren ustedes agarrar y mandar a los niños otra vez a sus escuelas, a su homeschool. No está bien porque educación especial por la ley tienen que darle la opción, es su derecho de que los niños estén donde deben y quieren estar. Igual los estudiantes regulares. Si tú pones un estudiante regular en una escuela que no quiere, no va a estudiar y va a ser dropout y va a hacer todo lo que quiera. Pero si tú pones un estudiante donde él quiere estar, va a ser el mejor estudiante y va a ser. Entonces, apoyemos a los estudiantes. Es la recomendación como madre que he sido, como comunidad que estoy participando ahora, ¿ok? De que le den esa prioridad. Materiales de instrucción y maestros. Ya de ahí las demás posiciones, si hay dinero, se puede hacer, pero si no, no. Prioridad, maestros y material de instrucción. That's it. Gracias.
Thank you. All right, gracias. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Muchísimas gracias for joining us. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but we really appreciate your participation today. We got a lot of very good information and questions and feedback. And the thought exchange will remain open if you still have additional feedback you want to provide through the thought exchange. It will remain open for you to be able to send us your feedback. Thank you.